When Lin Jing woke up this morning, she felt a little unfavorable. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and glanced at the bell on the bed, 6:45, in that familiar time. The sky outside the window was gray, and you could hear the radio sound from the remote railway station to remind passengers to pay attention to safety. He sniffed, got up to wash, and his brain was still exhausted from working overtime until midnight. As an ordinary office worker, his life is like a repeating tape, driving on the same track every day, so boring that people want to hit the wall. He grabbed his cell phone, brushed up on social software, and the boring jokes and chicken soup articles transferred by his colleagues. He clicked on a hand, put on the gray suit jacket that was slightly faded, carried his bag and left. Today is Monday, and the underground is definitely getting sardine jars again. He stood on the platform, with an old song on his headphones, staring at the iron car with empty eyes, thinking about what to eat for lunch in his brain. When the Underground Railway entered the station, the wind made people's face numb. As he entered the car with the abortion, he barely found a corner to stand firm, and then lowered his head and continued to brush his phone. The air in the car is hot, mixed with various perfumes and sweat smells, making people feel a little uncomfortable. At this moment, the car suddenly shaking violently, and the screams and shocks exploded in an instant. Without reacting, Lin Jing was thrown out suddenly and hit the glass of the car door. The pain accompanied by a dizzy turn, and his mind quickly blurred. When he opened his eyes again, he realized that he was still lying on the bed. The clock showed 6:45, and the sky outside the window was still so gray, and the broadcasting sound of the remote railway station was as always. He was stunned for a moment, and a ridiculous thought popped up in his heart: that's just a dream? But the pain on his head was still there, as if he reminded him that everything he had just said was not an illusion. He touched the back of his brain and did not find any wounds, but the pain was so clear that it made people feel uneasy. "I'm seeing the ghost," he muttered, forcing himself to calm down, then got up and wash. His movements were almost exactly the same as they were. He even took a special look at his phone, and the jokes and chicken soup articles were exactly the same. He felt a little nervous, and he felt a strange feeling that he couldn't describe, but he still wore the gray suit jacket with his head and carried his bag and went out. The underground station is still so stunning, the old song in the headphones, and the billboards on the platform are exactly the same. He stood in the crowd, staring at the iron, his heartbeat inexplicably accelerated. The moment the local railway station entered the station, he subconsciously grabbed the column beside him, and his brain was full of the accident that had just been dream. The car door opened, he hesitated for a moment, and he still slapped in with his head. Then, everything happened again. The car sways, screams, bumps, hurts, and blurred consciousness. When he opened his eyes again, it was still the familiar 6:45, the bed, and the gray sky outside the window. He sat up suddenly, breathing rapidly, and his head was covered in cold sweat. This time he no longer doubted whether he was dreaming because the pain was too real and his memory was too clear. "What the hell is going on?" he said in a low voice, with a trembling sound in his voice. He tried to recall what happened yesterday, but his brain was blank, and the only thing he could remember was this endless repetitive morning. He forced himself to calm down and grabbed his phone and wanted to call his friend, but the date displayed on the screen made his heart slam. Today was Monday, September 23rd, exactly the same as yesterday. He decided not to go to the underground station, changed his clothes, grabbed a bread and threw it into the monk's door, wanting to see if the outside world was repeated. But as soon as he reached the entrance of the small area, he found that the scene on the street was nothing like yesterday. The uncle who sold breakfast still had that smile, the stray dog on the road was still lying beside the trash can, and even the electric car license plates along the way were exactly the same. Lin Jing stood on the road, his brain was in chaos. He tried to snatch the next passerby and asked what number the other party was today, but the other party just glanced at him strangely and replied that it was Monday, September 23rd, and then he hurriedly walked away. He tried to call his colleagues in the company again, but the voice at the top of the phone was still so familiar, and even the complaints in his linguistic style were just right. "Impossible. This is absolutely abnormal. He gritted his teeth and decided to return to the underground station to see if he could find any trace. After all, that accident was the beginning of all this. He stood on the platform, the music in the headphones was still the old song, but this time he didn't wear the headphones, instead staring at the station's subway, trying to find any uneven places. The car door opened, he hesitated for a moment, and walked in. This time he specially chose a position close to the door, clutching the handrail tightly with both hands and staring at everyone around him. Just as the car was about to close, he suddenly heard a low voice sound in his ears. "Don't be nervous, Lin Jing, this is just the beginning." He suddenly turned around and found that there was no one around him. The sound seemed to be directly diamonding into his brain, with a cold smile that made him stiff. At this moment, the car began to sway violently again, and the screams echoed again. He subconsciously lowered his head and hugged it, ready to welcome the familiar bump. But this time, the collision did not come. After shaking the car, it slowly calmed down. Lin Jing raised his head and found that everyone around him kept playing with his mobile phone like nothing happened, as if the shaking just now was just his mistake. He gasped, and felt even more uneasy because he knew it was no coincidence. "Lin Jing, don't try to escape." The voice sounded again, this time clearer, with an unquestionable threat. He looked around and finally saw a woman in black clothes on the other end of the car. She wore a wide hat, which covered half of her face, but her eyes stared straight at him, as if she could see through his soul. He felt nervous and instinctively wanted to walk over, but there were too many people in the car, so he couldn't get over. The woman seemed to see his idea, slightly raised her hand, and made a keep-up hand for him. The next second, the Underground Railway arrived at the station and the car door opened. She turned around and walked out and disappeared into the crowd. Lin Jing hesitated for half a second, but still followed. He pushed the crowd and stumbled out of the car, his eyes tightly locking the black figure. She didn't walk fast, but could always keep a distance that he couldn't keep up. He followed her through the platform, climbed the escalator, and came to a small alley outside the underground station. "Wait!" He finally couldn't help but shout, with a hint of anxiety in the sound. The woman stopped and turned slowly, and her face under the brim of the hat was finally exposed. Her facial features were cold, her skin was so white that it was almost like a living person, and there was an unknown smile on the corner of her mouth. "Lin Jing, you are more suitable than I thought." Her voice was low, exactly the same as what I had just heard in my brain. "I am the executive officer of the Time Administration. From now on, you have been selected. Choose? What's the choice?" Lin Jing glanced at her eyebrows, thinking of a lot of questions in her heart, but what she wanted to know most was what was going on. "You know why I'm going to repeat this day, right? And what you did just now on the ground?" I didn't answer directly, but took out a small metal device from my clothes pocket, which looked like a watch, but the surface was constantly flashing with blue light. She pressed it lightly, and the device sounded low, then she looked up at him, with a little more review in her eyes. "You've been in a 24-hour cycle, and no matter how hard you try, you'll wake up tomorrow and go back to 6:45 this morning." Her speech was as calm as if she was telling a very ordinary fact. "It's not an accident, nor a dream. You're chosen as a time repairer because you have the talent to perceive the abnormality of time. Now, you have two choices: follow me, join the Time Administration, solve the abnormality of this scene, and continue to rush in the cycle until you're mentally shattered." Lin Jing was stunned for a moment, his brain was full of questions. Time cycle? Time Administration? Time repairer? These words sound like lyrics in science fiction movies, but everything he just experienced made him unable to respond. He looked down at the flashing device, and an inexplicable anxiety surged in his heart. "Why is it me?" He finally asked the first question, with a hint of reluctance in his voice. "I am just an ordinary person, nothing special. Why don't you look for someone else?" Wu's eyes flashed with a complicated emotion, but soon became cold again. She put away the device and said lightly, "Because you have been rolled in, there is no way out. This cycle is not random, it chooses you, which means you have some connection with it. As for the specific reason, you will know slowly." She paused for a moment, then turned toward the deep alley, and walked along, saying, "Come on, I'll tell you the rules. But remember, the Time Authority is not a charity organization, and joining us means you may never be able to return to your normal life." Lin Jing stood there, his brain formed a group. He looked at the back that was slowly moving away, lowered his head and looked at his palm, and the fear he felt on the ground was still in his heart. He knew that if he didn't keep up, he might really be replicated and crazy this day. But keeping up means entering a completely unknown world. Finally, he gritted his teeth and followed. The light in the alley became darker and darker, and there was an indescribable sense of pressure in the air. The steps ahead were as steady as if they had already thought that everything was normal. She would occasionally look back at him, with a slept in her eyes, as if she was evaluating whether he could bear the next thing. "What exactly is the Time Management Bureau you just said?" Lin Jing couldn't help asking, and there was a hurried voice in his voice. "With this cycle, how can we stop?" Shu stopped walking, turned to look at him, and his mouth slightly slighted. "The Time Administration is an organization that is responsible for maintaining a stable time and space. We exist to ensure that history is not tampered with and time will not get out of control. But some abnormalities, such as the cycle you are currently living in, are loopholes that we cannot directly make. To break it, you need to find the time point, a key point hidden in the cycle. Only by destroying the account can the cycle end." Time points? Lin Jing browed, feeling that this word sounded both strange and dangerous. Where's that thing? How to find it? After slamming the head, a shadow flashed through his eyes. This is the problem. The points are often hidden in the most dangerous places, sometimes memory fragments, sometimes a specific event. It changes continuously and even disguises itself as you know the most. You need to learn to perceive it, and this is what I will teach you next," she said, pulling out another small device from her pocket, which looked like a mini clock with complex symbols engraved on the surface. She pressed lightly, and a crisp tick sound came out in the clock, and then a mechanical sound suddenly sounded. "Hi, newcomer. I am Xiao Ku, your dedicated time assistant. I am very happy to know you. Although you look a little confused, don't worry. With me here, I guarantee that you won't get lost in the circle." "Probably." Lin Jing was startled by this sudden sound and almost threw the thing in her hand out. He looked down and saw that the surface of the hour clock showed a cartoony smile, and he blinked at him. His mouth twitched, feeling that everything was getting worse and worse. "What's this?" He couldn't help but complain, and his eyes looked at Wu's eyes full of suspicion. He said expressionlessly, "Xiao Ku is an intelligent AI provided by the administration. He is responsible for recording the key lines in the loop and helping you with time-hopping technical support. Its personality is a bit special, but its function is still reliable. Of course, there will be a little bug at times, and you have to behave." "Hey, what is a little bug?" "I'm the most advanced technology crystallization of the administration." Xiao Ku protested dissatisfiedly, with a sense of grievance in his voice. "Newbie, don't listen to her. I guarantee that it is 100% reliable. Now, give me a name, so our relationship will be more closely related." Lin Jing looked at this familiar AI without saying a word and felt that his 3 views were being refreshed. He said, "Okay, I'll call you Xiao Ku, don't waste your time." Then he turned to look at the monk. "So, what am I going to fuck next? How do you find that account?" Wu Xiaoshu muttered little, just said coldly, "The first step is suitable for circulation. You need to learn to observe the minor changes in each repetition, because the truth is often hidden in the details. The second step is to learn to control your emotions. The repetition is not only a physical repetition, but also a stress on your spirit. If you break down, everything is over." She paused for a moment, her eyes suddenly became clear. "Finally, remember one thing: no one is completely trustworthy in the cycle, including me. You have to learn to judge by yourself, otherwise you may never get out of this day." Lin Jing heard this and his heart sank. He looked at the expressionless face and found that she seemed to be confused. But he didn't have time to think about it, because a deep sound of silence suddenly came from the alley, like a sound of some mechanical actuation. Jian's face changed slightly and he said in a low voice, "It seems that someone has noticed you. Get ready, we have to leave here first." She turned around and walked quickly in the opposite direction of the sound of the roar. Lin Jing was stunned for a moment and followed closely. Xiaoku kept muttering in his hand, "Hey, newcomer, do you feel it's exciting? That's just the beginning, and there's something more exciting later." Lin Jing followed the silhouette quickly through the alley. The stone road under his feet was a little slippery, and there was a damp and musty smell in the air. The walls on both sides of the alley were covered with moss, and occasionally there were a few dim road lights, as if they were squeezing and not extinguishing. He was still digesting everything he had just heard: the time cycle, the time account, the time administration. These words were like a group of irritating, filling his brain, giving him a feeling of innocence. But the low voice behind him was like a death talisman, forcing him to follow the tight steps. "What sound is that?" He finally couldn't help asking, and there was a tight sound in the sound. He glanced back, and the light in the alley seemed to be blocked by something, as if a group of black shadows were approaching. "The head is not reversing, and the language is as cold as ice. Don't pipe, speed up the pace." That's the time dog, the tool used by the authority to track down the anomalies. They don't attack directly, but they record every move you do and then transfer the data back to the top. If you're locked by them, each cycle will be harder next. Time dog? Lin Jing was stunned, feeling that the name sounded like it was popping up from a game. "Do you say that thing is alive?" "It's not alive, it's a mechanical body, built-in time tracking module." The slogan is very fast, as if you don't want to explain it more. "They can sense the abnormal fluctuations of the time flow, and you're the biggest anomaly now. So, don't stop and look back." Lin Qing felt a tight heart and kept following her steps with her head. Xiaoku suddenly made a sharp deedy sound in his hand, and then shouted in that annoying language, "Hey, newcomer, don't be tight. The dogs are not fast, as long as we keep a distance, they can't catch up. However, I suggest you run faster, because I just scanned until 3 are approaching, the distance, 200 meters. 200 meters? Lin Jing was almost knocked out by this. "Why didn't you say it earlier? Also, aren't you saying it's 100% reliable? Shouldn't you warn you in advance?" The system has a little delay, don't mind." Xiaoku was embarrassed in his voice. "Don't worry, I'm already calculating the best escape route. Turn left, and then walk straight 50 meters. There is an underground passage, so we can get rid of them." When I heard this, my eyebrows slightly snaked, but it didn't respond, but it just quickly turned to a narrower alley on the left. Lin Jing followed behind. His pace was a little stumbled, and his heartbeat seemed to be about to pop out of his chest. He could feel the sound of the birds behind him getting closer and closer, and he even heard a harsh sound of metal friction, like something dragging on the ground. Can this broken AI really be reliable? He couldn't help but mutter. When Xiaoku heard this, he immediately responded discomfort. "Hey, newcomer, don't doubt my professionalism. The underground passage is right in front. After entering, I will start the interference signal, so that those dogs can't find you." Lin Jing had no intention of quarreling with it, and gritted his teeth and followed the underground passage that Xiaoku said. The entrance to the passage is hidden behind a pile of broken trash cans, and it is pitch black inside, and there is a pungent smell in the air. Zhang Wu took out a long shining rod from his clothes pocket, folded it lightly, and the rod emitted a faint blue light, barely illuminating the road ahead. "Follow the slightest point, don't lose the team." Her voice was low, carrying an unquestionable threat. Lin Jing clicked a little and tried to adjust his breathing to calm himself down. But the sound of the geese behind them did not disappear just because they entered the passage, but instead became clearer, as if the so-called time dogs had already chased the entrance. "Xiaoku, where are you disturbing the signal?" he asked softly, his palms covered in sweat. "It's starting, don't urge." Xiaoku's voice was filled with an impatience, and then a series of deedy prompts were released. "Okay, the signal has been issued, and the dog's tracking system will lose its power for a short time. We have about 5 minutes to turn away. It is recommended to walk straight, then turn right, and the exit is 300 meters away. The silence didn't say anything, just speeded up the pace. Lin Jing followed behind and began to think about it in his brain. He didn't know why he was thrown into this, he didn't know whether he could believe it, nor did he know when this cycle would end. But now, the only thing he can do is follow her, because he knows very well that if he stays alone, he will probably not be able to save him for 5 minutes. The air in the passage is getting worse and worse, and sometimes some strange symbols can be seen on the wall, such as some deliberately left mark. Lin Jing couldn't help but take a few more glances, feeling that these symbols were familiar with indescribable, but he couldn't remember where they had seen them. At this moment, Jade suddenly stopped and turned to look at him, with a warning in his eyes. "Don't be distracted, focus on your feet." Her voice was as cold as a knife. "Every second in the cycle is important. The time you waste may be the next failure fire." Lin Jing was so nervous that she said this that she pulled her back, and then took back her eyes and followed her with her. After a few minutes, they finally came out from the other end of the passage, and the exit was a wasteland industrial area, surrounded by old factories and steel racks. The sky is still the gray color, as if it will never clear up. The sound of the bird behind him could no longer be heard, but the uneasiness in Lin Jing's heart did not diminish. "Is it safe now?" he gasped, his voice carrying a burst of fatigue. "Safe?" Jian sneered and snatched his head. "There is no real safety in the circle. Do you think it's okay to throw away the dog? They are just the first line of defense, and there are even more nuisances waiting for you behind." "What's even more nuisance?" Lin Jing felt like he was about to be forced to be raped by these words. "Can you explain it clearly at one time? What exactly should I face?" The monk glanced at him, and there was a complex emotion in his eyes, as if he wanted to tell him more. Finally, she still spoke. Her voice was low. "The Time Authority is not the kind of righteous organization you think. We maintain time and space stability, but sometimes stability means sacrifice. Your current circulation is not a natural abnormality, but a human being. Someone is using it and trying to do something, not to do. Man made it?" Lin Jing was shocked when he heard it, and a name suddenly flashed in his brain. "Are you saying, Shi Qing?" Wu's face changed slightly, as if he didn't expect him to guess so quickly. She was silent for a few seconds before she was slow. "It's right, it's a blunt. He was a defector to the administration, who participated in the core research and development of time control technology that year, but later betrayed the organization and tried to use circular energy to create a world belonging to him, a nation that never changes." "Eternal country?" Lin Jing heard a fog. What does that mean? What does he want to fuck? He wanted to confine time to a certain stage and let everything stop flowing. The voice of Wu's voice brought a rare anger. If he succeeded, the world would no longer have a future, no longer change, and everyone, everything, would be trapped in a moment that would never change. Can you imagine that kind of scoundrel? Lin Jing heard this and felt a slight roar on his back. He tried to imagine the scene, but there was only a blank in his brain. He slammed his head and said in a low voice, "Then why didn't you arrest him directly? Isn't the administration very harmful?" Jane smiled bitterly, with a helpless look in her eyes, "Because he has mastered the skills we cannot reach. He can control the loops and even change the location of the snatch. We have tried many times, but each time they failed. And..." She paused for a moment, and the voice became lower. "Inside the administration, some people don't want him to be caught." As soon as this happened, Lin Qing's heart sank. He looked at the expressionless face and found that she knew more than she said. He wanted to chase him, but Wu had turned around and walked towards the direction of the abandoned factory, and walked around and said, "Don't ask, your mission is to survive now, and then you will find a profit. Others, when you have the qualifications to know, I will tell you." Lin Jing gritted his teeth and followed silently without saying anything. Xiaoku suddenly made a quick drip sound in his hand, and then said in the verb that deserves a beating, "Hey, newbie, don't be too frustrated. Although it sounds bad, with me here, we can definitely do it. Now, find a place to rest first, and I've detected that your heart rate is a little high. and it's not a good thing to have too much pressure. Close your mouth. Lin Jing replied without any hesitation, but he still couldn't help but look down at his wrist. Indeed, his hands were shaking slightly, and the tightness and running just now made his muscles ache all over his body. He took a deep breath, tried to calm himself down, and then followed the sir into a broken factory. The factory was empty, the ground was filled with dust and gravel, and the air was filled with the smell of iron. Wu walked to a corner, lifted a piece of rag from the ground, wiped his hands casually, and then turned to look at him. Sit down, next I will teach you how to perceive the changes in the cycle. This is the first and most important step. Lin Jing clicked a little, found a relatively clean place to sit down. He looked at the device that took out the watch from his pocket, pressed it lightly, and a blue light flashed over the surface of the device, and then a virtual screen was projected, showing a bunch of incomprehensible data and charts. This is a time flow monitor that can record every slight change in the cycle. The voice of the pen is calm, like a teacher talking to students. Although the cycle seems to be repeated, there are small differences every time, such as someone's movements, the swaying amplitude of the earth, and even the temperature of the weather. These differences are the traces of finding the point. You need to learn to observe and record it. Lin Jing heard this and suddenly had an idea in his brain. Wait, do you mean that every cycle is not exactly the same? Then why didn't I find it before? Because you don't focus, said Jane coldly. Ordinary people only think that everything is the same in the circulation, because the brain automatically ignores minor changes. But as a practitioner, your talent can make you perceive these differences as long as you learn to focus. She said, pushing the monitor to him and pointing to a curve on the screen. Look, this is the time flow from 6:45 this morning to the present time. Where the red mark is the unusual wave. Do you think about these times? Do you feel anything wrong? Lin Jing stared at the curve on the screen, trying to recall what happened today. Wake up at 6:45, the underground station, the accident, and then the appearance of the trance. He suddenly was stunned for a moment, pointed to a red point on the curve and said, "This is the time when the underground railway sways, right? And this should be the moment when I hear your voice." I clicked a little, and there was a little more conviction in my eyes. It's great, your perception is stronger than I expected. These abnormal waves are evidence of circulating the picture to cover the truth. The points are often hidden in the strongest places of the wave, but they are also the most dangerous. You need to learn to distinguish which waves are traps and which are the real threads. Lin Jing heard this, and a pressure that could not be expressed in his heart. He looked down at the screen, trying to remember the locations of the red spots, but his brain couldn't help but think, if the snatch is really so dangerous, is it possible that he would collapse before he found it? Don't think too much. Jian seemed to see through his thoughts and said coldly, the cycle will amplify your fears, but it will also make you stronger. As long as you don't give up, you will find a way out. Lin Jing pointed a little, although he was still not sure. At least now, he had an obvious goal, to find the abnormal fluctuations and then dig out the whereabouts of the points. He took a deep breath and asked, what about next? How long are we going to stay here? Wu looked out the window. Under the gray sky, a low sound came from a distance, like thunder, or something approaching. She glanced at her eyebrows and said in a low voice, not long, the cycle time is limited, we have to find the first line before the next reset. Get ready, after a few minutes of rest, we're going to a place. Where do you go? Lin Jing asked, with a hint of alertness in his voice. The monk didn't answer directly, but said lightly, a place that allows you to truly understand the circulation. Don't ask, just follow me. Lin Jing looked at her expressionless face and felt a little uneasy. He didn't know what the hell was in the market, nor what he would face next, but he just told him that it just began. He held the moment in his hand tightly, listened to the occasionally deedy sound, and tried to prepare himself for his mentality. The sound outside the factory was getting louder and louder, as if it was predicting something was coming soon. Lin Jing sat on the ground, his brain was full of words he had just heard: time dog, time puppy, eternal country. These things were like a huge net, trapping him tightly inside. He knew that if he wanted to survive and break this cycle, he would have to adapt it all faster than anyone else. "Hey, newcomer, don't be stunned." Xiaoke's voice suddenly rose, carrying a silk squid. "I just detected a new wave of time. It's not far from us. Do you want to go and have a look? Maybe it's a big thread." Lin Jing lowered his head and glared at it, saying unhappily, "Are you sure this time isn't a bug?" I'm sure it's not." Xiaoke's cartoon smile blinked on the screen. "Believe me, let's go explore together." When the monk heard this, he stood up, patted the dust on his body, and said lightly, "Let's go, time will not wait for anyone." Lin Jing stood up and followed her out of the factory, with a sense of premonition in her heart. The exploration mentioned in this scene might be much more dangerous than he thought. Lin Jing followed Wu out of the old factory. The gray sky outside was so stressed that people couldn't breathe. The sound of the far away was filled with a deep bird, as if the whole world was shaking uneasy. He tightened the moment in his hand. The AI clock, which he called 100% reliable, was making a quick dee-dee sound, and the cartoon smiles on the screen flashed, as if he didn't feel the tight atmosphere at all. "Hey, newcomer, don't be on the battlefield," Xiaoke said in that beating language. "The time fluctuation I just detected is not far ahead. According to my data analysis, there is a 72.3% probability that is an important thread. Of course, there is a 27.7% probability that is a trap. But who makes us adventurers, right? Close your mouth." Lin Jing replied in a low voice, staring at Wu Zhao's back with his eyes tightly. She walked in front, her steps as steady as a sophisticated machine, and the underside of the black sweater swayed slightly with the wind, revealing a sense of indescribable coldness. He was still unsure. The words he had just heard, eternal country, time points, and time-honored sarcasm, were like a group of irritating, which made his brain buzz. Jian suddenly stopped walking and glanced at him, his eyes as if they could pierce his heart. "Please focus, Lin Jing." Her voice was low, with a little impatient. "Every second in the cycle is precious. If you are distracted, you may not be the one who dies." Lin Jing felt a little nervous, and he pointed his head a little, and followed her with his stern air. They walked through the scrapped industrial area, walked through a bunch of raw iron racks and broken mechanical slaughter, and came to a building that looked like an old warehouse. The iron door of the warehouse was half open, and it was pitch black inside. There was a damp, musty smell in the air, and you could still hear the sound of water droplets falling to the ground. "Is this where you say it?" Lin Jing browed, with a hint of suspicion in his voice. "It seems nothing special." Wu Xiao ignored his doubts, but took out the watch device from his pocket and pressed it lightly. The blue light flashed in the darkness, illuminating her white face. She looked down at the screen, then said coldly, "The wave source is inside. Prepare, it may not be simple here." Lin Jing swallowed, and his heartbeat accelerated inexplicably. He looked down at Xiaoke, and the smile on the screen was blinking at him, like encouragement and mocking. He took a deep breath and stepped into the warehouse. The space inside was much larger than he thought. The ground was filled with dust and gravel, with some broken wooden boxes piled up in the corners of the wall, and there was an indescribable sense of pressure in the air. A glitter rod was raised, and the blue light swept across the surroundings, illuminating a vast land. Lin Jing followed her, looking around her eyes, trying to find any unfavorable places. But there is nothing but dust and destruction. Just as he was about to ask, Xiaoke suddenly let out a sharp dee-dee sound, breaking the silence in the warehouse. "Warning! Warning!" The high-strength time fluctuation was detected, and the source distance was less than 10 meters. Xiaoke's voice rarely brought a tight flash. "Newbie, it is recommended to retreat immediately. The energy value of this thing is a bit beyond my expectations." 10 meters? Lin Jing was stunned for a moment and looked around, but the surrounding area was still empty. He was about to ask what was going on when he suddenly felt a slight vibration coming from his feet, as if the ground was shaking. Then, a deep sound of a deep geese came from the depths of the warehouse, like some huge machine being activated. Jian's face changed. He quickly turned around and shouted in a low voice, "Get back!" She grabbed Lin Jing's arm and pulled him behind a wooden box. Just as they squatted down, the ground in the center of the warehouse suddenly cracked, and a dazzling blue light shot out from the crack, accompanied by a harsh buzzing sound. The entire space began to twist, as if something was tearing it open. "What's this?" Lin Jing's eyes widened, his heart beat as fast as if it was about to explode. He looked at the head and saw a huge circular device floating in the blue light, with complex symbols engraved on the surface, like some ancient clock, but each finger was spinning at irregular speeds, emitting a slight wave of energy. "Time Rift." Jian's voice was so low that he could hardly hear it, and there was a rare tightness in his eyes. "It was worse than I expected. This was not an ordinary wave, it was a trap left by time." "Train?" Lin Jing's heart sank, and his brain suddenly flashed through what he had said before. The waves in the circle are true and false, some are wires, and some are fatal dangers. He gritted his teeth and asked, "Then what should we do now? Run or fuck it?" "Can't run." The sword slammed, staring at the rotating device. "The crack has locked your time frequency. If you leave, it will tear your timeline and let you disappear in the circle. The only way is to close it." "Close?" Lin Jing was stunned, feeling that this sounded simple. "What's the matter? That thing doesn't look like it's closed." I didn't answer, but just took out a small metal tool from my clothes pocket, which looked like a mini screw knife, but the surface was flashed with a faint arc. She said in a low voice, "I'm here to deal with the cracks, you're responsible for covering it. Remember, don't let anything get close to me or we'll be done." "Cover?" Lin Jingying had not reacted yet, and heard a metal friction sound coming from around the warehouse, as if something was approaching quickly. When he turned around, he saw several black mechanical bodies crawling out of the shadow, shaped like a wolf, but his whole body was made of metal. His eyes were flashing with angry light, and some blue liquid was constantly dripping from his mouth. "Time Dog." He lowered his voice and a slight swelled in his heart. These guys were even more terrifying than the description he had heard before, and each step was filled with mechanical precision, as if he had already locked his position. "Hey, newcomer, don't be stunned." Xiaoke's voice suddenly sounded, and he was in a hurry. "I have activated the defense mode. Although I don't have any attack power, it can help you mark their weaknesses. Look, there's energy leakage in the link on the left, hit there." Lin Jing gritted his teeth, grabbed a stick on the ground, and slammed it on his head. He had no experience in fighting, but fortunately these dogs were not too fast, so he aimed at the weakness of Zyakishio and smashed it hard. The iron stick hit the metal joint and made a harsh bang. The dog's movements froze, and a low sound came out, and then fell to the ground, and the blue liquid flowed out of the joint, like blood. "Fuck it well." Xiaoke shouted excitedly, "Come again, the right side, the back leg position." Lin Qin gasped heavily and turned around and smashed towards the other side, but this time the other party seemed to have defense, and suddenly slammed him and knocked him to the ground. The iron rod flew out, and he felt a pain in his chest, as if he was pressed by a large stone. He tried to get up, but the red eyes of the dog were already close to him, and the blue liquid in his mouth dripped on his face, carrying a biting chill. At this moment, a blue light flashed through, and the dog's body was suddenly locked in mid-air, as if it had been pressed down the pause key. Lin Jing was stunned for a moment, turned around and saw that Jian was holding the watch device in one hand and operating the core of the crack with the other hand, his face as if he would fall down at any time. "Don't be stunned, get up." Her voice was filled with a weak silk. "I spent time on my back, but I could only last for 10 seconds to solve it." Lin Jing gritted her teeth and got up, lifted up the iron stick, and smashed the dog's hind legs hard. This time, the machinery fell apart, and the parts were scattered all over the ground, making a harsh noise. He gasped and turned toward the sword, only to see that she had inserted the metal tool into the core of the cracked device, and the rotation speed of the fingertips was obviously slowing down. "It's done," Jian said in a low voice, with a burst of fatigue in the sound. But at this moment, a sharp scream suddenly came from the crack, and the blue light burst again, and the entire warehouse began to shake violently. Lin Jing had not reacted yet, and felt a huge suction force coming from the crack, as if he wanted to pull his mind into it directly. "Be careful." Jian rushed over and pushed him off, and he was stumbled by the suction. She gritted her teeth and kept her body steady, then took out a small crystal from her pocket and smashed it hard towards the core of the crack. As the crystal shattered, a white light flashed through, and the blue light in the crack quickly dimmed. Then the entire device emitted a low sound and stopped the rotation. The vibration in the warehouse stopped, and the pressure in the air disappeared. Lin Jing sat on the ground, gasping for breath. Her brain was blank. He looked at the penis and she half kneeled on the ground, her face as white as paper, and her head was covered with cold sweat. It seemed that the time just now had caused a lot of burden on her. Are you okay?" He hesitated for a moment, and asked. After slamming his head, he stood up reluctantly, and his voice was low. "I'm fine, but this is just the beginning. There will be no one trap at the moment, and it will be even more dangerous next." Lin Jing heard this and felt powerless in her heart. He looked at Xiao Ku with his head down, and the smile on the screen was blinking at him, as if he wanted to say something, but he was in the mood to hear it. He knew that the battle just now was just a small test of the bull's knife, and the real challenge was still behind. A few hours later, they left the warehouse and arrived at a deserted residential area. The sky was still gray, and there was a suppressed breath in the air. The monk took him to a broken apartment, stopped and looked at him, with a complex emotion in his eyes. "This is the starting point of your memory." Her voice was low, as if there was something hidden. "The time point is likely to be hidden in your past, an event you have forgotten long ago. Go in and face it." Lin Qing was shocked, and some blurry scenes suddenly flashed in her brain: childhood home, a quarrel, and a harsh crying. He gritted his teeth, pushed open the door of the apartment, and stepped into the darkness. The scene behind the door stunned him. It was exactly the same as the place where he lived when he was a child, and the scratches on the wall were exactly the same. "This is..." He spoke in a low voice, with a trembling sound. He turned to look at Wu's eyes, but found that her eyes were unusually cold, as if he had known what would happen. "Let's go," she said lightly. "The truth is ahead." Lin Jing took a deep breath, made a step, and walked towards the deep end of the apartment. Every step was like stepping on the tip of a knife, and the fragments of memory began to flood like a flood, making him feel like a broken head. He knew that there was a hidden past he least wanted to face, but it could also be the only hope to break the cycle. They walked through the narrow corridor and came to a small bedroom. The door was half open, and a deep cry came from it. Lin Jing's hand was shaking slightly, and he pushed open the door. He saw a small figure curled up at the corner of the bed, his shoulders trembling, as if he was afraid that he was extremely scared. That was when he was a kid. "Lin Jing, have you remembered it?" The voice of the monk sounded in his ears, carrying an unavoidable sense of pressure. "This is your time point, the tragedy you forgot about when you tried to remember. Facing it, you will never get out of this day." Lin Jing gritted his teeth, and the memory in his brain began to become clear: the quarrel between parents, the shui of mother, the back of father falling away from the door, and the accident that changed everything forever. He clamped his hands tightly into fists, trying to squeeze the fear in his heart, but the scene in front of him became more and more real, as if he had directly pulled him back to that day. At this moment, a low smile suddenly came from the depths of the room, and then a tall figure walked out slowly, with a mocking smile on his face. "No, Lin Qing, you finally came." The man's voice was cold, as if he could save everything. "I am Shi Qing, welcome to my game." Lin Jing was shocked and turned to look at Wu Xiao, and found that her face was unusually calm, as if she had known that Shi Xiao would appear. He suddenly realized that all this might be a trap, and he had no way out. As soon as he approached, he held a core device flashing the blue light in his hand, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more innovative. "You think you can break the loop by finding a crypto? Naive." His voice was low, carrying a crazy thought. "This loop is tailor-made for you, Lin Qing. Your pain and your fears are the cornerstones of my eternal state. Send your memory, otherwise I will destroy you." Lin Jing gritted his teeth, and his brain was in chaos. He knew that if he handed over his memory, he might lose himself completely, but if he didn't hand over, he would never let him go. He turned to look at the pen, tried to ask for help, but saw her step back slowly, and a flash of prick in her eyes. "Lin Jing, choose." Her voice was low and she felt helpless. "This is your last chance." Lin Qing's heart sank, realizing that he could only rely on himself for the decision. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to look straight into his eyes, and his voice was determined. "Want to take my memory? Make a dream. I will break your cycle, even if I give everything." Shi Qing's smile froze, then he snorted coldly, and the blue light in the core device in his hand burst into flames, and the whole room began to vibrate violently. Lin Jing knew that the real battle had just begun. He held Xiaoke tightly, his brain was full of fragments of memory, ready to welcome this final game about time and fate. The pressure in the air became stronger and stronger, and the walls of the room began to twist, as if they were actually collapsing. Lin Jing stood there, his heart beat as fast as if he was about to explode, but he knew that no matter what, he could not retreat. Because this is not only for oneself, but also for the countless souls trapped in the circle. "Come on, it's time," he said softly, a desperate light ignited in his eyes. "Let me see how harmful your eternal country is."